Hello. Thank you for taking this training to learn more about what types of activities qualify as grassroots lobbying. Before we begin discussing grassroots lobbying, it is important to set the stage and provide some context. There are two types of lobbying, or two ways in which lobbying can occur. The first is direct lobbying, and the second is indirect, often referred to as grassroots lobbying. Direct lobbying is what probably comes to mind when you think about lobbying. It is attempting to influence a public official directly by way of direct contact, which can include face-to-face meetings, written contact, or other similar forms of contact directly made with a public official. Another way to influence public officials is through grassroots lobbying, which is indirect and involves indirect contact with a public official. This training focuses on grassroots lobbying and explains what makes a communication a grassroots lobbying communication that must be disclosed on a lobbyist or client's lobbying filing. As always, please note that for any lobbying to be reportable, it must involve an attempt to influence a specific list of governmental actions as set forth in Section 1-CC of the Lobbying Act. And the lobbyist or client must exceed or reasonably anticipate exceeding the $5,000 compensation and expense threshold, as set forth in the Commission's regulations. Now let's get into grassroots lobbying. Grassroots lobbying means an attempt to indirectly influence a lobbying activity as defined by Section 1-CC of the Lobbying Act through a grassroots lobbying communication. A grassroots lobbyist is a person or organization who solicits another to deliver a message to a public official. Grassroots lobbying occurs when an organization encourages others, such as members of the public, to contact legislators or other public officials to express a particular point of view on proposed or pending legislation, rules, regulations, or executive action. Please note, such activity is still considered lobbying regardless of whether an organization describes these activities as advocacy, community education, or legislative policy. So, what is a grassroots lobbying communication? Three things are required to be considered a grassroots lobbying communication. First, the communication must reference a lobbying activity. Second, the communication must take a clear position on that lobbying activity. And finally, the communication must include a call to action. What is a call to action? A solicitation to the public or person. 1. To directly contact a public official or have them solicit others to directly contact a public official. To qualify as a call to action, the communication does not have to specify the form of contact. For example, including an address, email address, website address, phone number, or similar contact information for a public official counts as a call to action, even if the communication does not specifically ask the public to contact the public official. In addition, including a paper or electronic petition, text message, social media communication, or similar material for the recipient to use to communicate with a public official counts as a call to action, even if the communication does not specifically ask the public to use such material. Including a web link to these materials also counts as a call to action. Examples of where you might find grassroots lobbying include websites, social media communications, print media ads, TV and radio ads, rallies, billboards, and lobbyists requesting another person to contact a public official. The following are some examples to help illustrate what constitutes a grassroots lobbying communication and what does not. First, let's look at the message on the left. Governor Hochul, support the casino gambling bill. Does this qualify as a grassroots lobbying communication? No, this is not grassroots lobbying because there is no call to action. No solicitation asking another person to contact a public official. This also does not constitute direct lobbying because placing a message on a billboard is not direct contact, even if it specifically addresses a public official. This message may or may not have been seen by the governor. Is this a grassroots lobbying communication? New Yorkers want clean energy. Tell your legislator to sign Bill A1234. Yes, it has all three elements of a grassroots lobbying communication. It, 1, implicates a lobbying activity, which is a legislative bill. 2, takes a clear position in support of that bill. And 3, includes a call to action, solicitation to contact your legislator. Now let's take a look at this billboard. It says, New Yorkers support clean energy. Vote for Bill A1234. www.gosolar.com. This contains a slightly different message. Looking at it, you can see that it, 1, implicates a lobbying activity, a legislative bill, and 2, takes a clear position in support of that bill. But the call to action is not included in the main message like it was on the previous slide. To determine if there is a call to action, we have to look at the website. In this case, let's assume that when you go to the website, it contains a message asking the public to contact their legislator and tell them to vote for Bill A1234. If so, is this a grassroots lobbying communication? Yes, it has all three elements of a grassroots lobbying communication. It, 1, implicates a lobbying activity, a legislative bill. 2, takes a clear position in support of that bill. And 3, includes a call to action. The website includes a message asking the public to contact their legislator in support of Bill A1234. What about this? We need to increase the cap on charter schools. Morecharterschools.com. At first glance, it is not clear that this references a lobbying activity. However, since any such increase requires legislation, this would implicate a lobbying activity. As an aside, any messages relating to funding provided in the budget bill would also implicate a lobbying activity. Back to this example. We see that it implicates a lobbying activity and takes a clear position on it. So the final criteria that must be met is whether there is a call to action. Again, we need to follow the website to determine that. In this example, let's assume the website leads to a page that contains a petition or form to send to a public official containing this lobbying message. Given all of this info, does this constitute a grassroots lobbying communication? Yes, it has all three elements of a grassroots lobbying communication. It, 1, implicates a lobbying activity. This increase requires legislation. 2, takes a clear position in support of the increase. And 3, includes a call to action. When you follow the website, it includes a petition or form to send to a public official. Okay, now that we have gone over some examples illustrating what constitutes a grassroots lobbying communication, Let's talk about who can engage in grassroots lobbying. It is important to understand that grassroots lobbying can be engaged in by an individual on their own behalf or by an organization on behalf of the organization. Individual. A person who publishes a grassroots lobbying communication is engaged in grassroots lobbying on their own behalf and is acting as their own designated lobbyist. For example, a person who buys a billboard space that includes a grassroots lobbying communication is engaging in grassroots lobbying on their own behalf. Organization. An organization engages in grassroots lobbying on its own behalf when a grassroots lobbying communication is issued by the organization, including when an employee delivers a grassroots lobbying communication at the direction of the organization. Every grassroots lobbying communication is attributable to a lobbyist, which may be the organization as a whole, but not necessarily require the identification of any individual lobbyist. For example, an organization that includes a grassroots lobbying communication on its website is engaging in grassroots lobbying on its own behalf. And an organization that issues a press release on its own letterhead that includes a grassroots lobbying communication is engaging in grassroots lobbying on its own behalf. Moving on to discuss grassroots lobbying via social media. Just to reiterate, a social media communication constitutes a grassroots lobbying communication when it meets the elements that we have already discussed. When grassroots lobbying through a social media communication is undertaken by an organization through the organization's social media accounts, it is reportable lobbying activity by the organization. When grassroots lobbying through a social media communication is undertaken by an individual through their personal social media account, this activity is not reportable lobbying activity, unless such individual is specifically retained by a client for their social media activity. Personal social media posts are treated the same in direct or grassroots lobbying. They are presumptively not reportable. For example, if lobbyists at Company A pay social media influencer Sam Smith to repost one of their grassroots lobbying communications on his personal Facebook page, which has over 1 million followers, that post would be considered grassroots lobbying. In this case, Sam Smith would need to register as a lobbyist, lobbying on behalf of Company A, and disclose this lobbying activity on his lobbying filings. Company A would also disclose this lobbying activity, including how much compensation they paid Sam Smith on their client filing. Personal social media posts by Company A's employees are presumptively not reportable by Company A. Here are some typical expenses that might be applicable to grassroots lobbying. As you can see, some relate to the use of social media, and others involve consulting and buying advertising. Media buys, consulting services, sponsoring posts, staff time allocated to planning and posting, search engine optimization, and advertising. Let's take a minute to review what we learned in this training. Grassroots lobbying is an attempt to indirectly influence a lobbying activity as defined in Section 1-CC of the Lobbying Act through a grassroots lobbying communication. A grassroots lobbying communication means a communication that 1. References or otherwise implicates a lobbying activity, 2. Takes a clear position on that action, and 3. Includes a call to action asking the public to contact a public official with the grassroots lobbying message. Colleagues' lobbying regulations can be found in 19 NYCRR Part 943. Section 943.7 specifically deals with grassroots lobbying. As always, we're here to help. Please reach out to us through one of these methods with any questions you may have. Thank you for your participation today.